Dear Ambassador Regev, dear members of the European Parliament, dear Professor Ifat Biton, dear Orit Sulitseanu, thank you very much for joining us. On behalf of the Israeli mission to the EU and NATO, on behalf of the European Jewish Congress, the World Jewish Congress, EJC Transatlantic Institute, Bnei Brit International, and ELNet, we would like to welcome you to this conference that will shed light on the sexual and gender-based violence in the October 7 attacks in Israel. So thank you very much for joining us for this important event. Before we start, we would like to show you a very brief video dedicated to the Israeli women still held captives in Gaza.
Welcome to the European Parliament, dear guests, dear Ambassador Regev, dear colleagues, David, and my co-host of this conference, Monika, Assita, that will arrive in a few minutes. Dear Ariela Wojcik, Daniela Schwamenthal, Alina Brickman, Levin Pritz, and Daphna Friedman, and above all, Orit Sulitseanu and Professor Ifat Biton, Professor of Law. Together we show that there are voices in Europe from various countries, background and political tendencies who are determined to speak up for Israeli women, denounce Hamas sexual acts of torture, and defend the universalist cause of women's rights. Shortly after the 7th of October, I took part in a mission to Israel, since I was utterly convinced that as MEPs, we had the responsibility to listen, feel, and testify about an unprecedented massacre. It was with ELNet. And this massacre was unprecedented by its extent and unprecedented by its incommensurate savagery. History taught us that when confronted to such infamy, some are tempted to deny and minimize the reality of facts, either to safeguard their vision of the world, therefore taking the risk of blindness, either for more obscure reasons. Despite the overwhelming amount of proof and the Hamas terrorists proudly recording and live broadcasting their atrocities, some people still refute the reality of the 7th of October massacres. Even the United Nations waited until last week to officially acknowledge that there was convincing information of sexual violence committed on this gruesome day. During my mission to Israel, I went to Kibbutz Be'eri and Re'im, where the Nova Festival took place, as well as to the Shura military base where victims were being identified. There I was struck by the testimony of a Canadian woman who was working to give dead female soldiers an appropriate mortuary care respectful of the Jewish law. She explained to us that in normal circumstances they do not have so many bodies to take care of, but that on October the 7th they saw women bodies coming by hundreds. She told us about how dead bodies were coming to the base, most of the times in fragments. And I will never forget the moment when she told us that once she had suddenly seen a manicured finger that was the only remnant of a young woman who, this fateful morning, had taken care of herself, putting makeup on to go dancing. We did not know then that the hell in which hostages are detained would last this long. As we speak, all we will be hearing about today is currently happening to women, young girls, and perhaps men in Gaza. Their liberation is the emergency. We will not give up until every single one of them is free, safe, and back home. We did not know then that we all those who are deeply involved in the fights for women's rights would have to face the guilty and shameful silence of too many feminist and human rights organizations. On 8th of March, while the members of the feminist collective Nous Vivrons were taking part in demonstrations in Paris on the occasion of the International Women's Rights Day, they were threatened, thrown objects, and insulted. Yes, in 2024 in Paris, in a feminist demonstration. If the police were not there, who knows how this violence would have ended. All these events show the harmful effects of abandoning universalism in the fights for human and women's rights. We did not know then that we were facing the biggest, that we will face the biggest waves of anti-Semitism since the Second World War. In my own country, France, anti-Semitic acts have been multiplied by 1,000. It is particularly essential today, while we are remembering Samuel Sandler and his two children, Gabriel and Arié, as well as the young Myriam Montenegro, who were murdered by Islamist terrorists in Toulouse exactly 10 years ago from now. The worst things would be to let despair and melancholy overwhelm us. This is what Hamas and their allies in Iran, in Lebanon, in Qatar, or even here on European soil are aiming at. They are trying to weaken us by threatening our attachment to life, freedom, and empowerment. While I was yesterday evening at the 80th birthday celebration of the CRIF, the umbrella of French Jewish organizations, French President Emmanuel Macron rightly reminded us that anti-Semitism is the ultimate enemy of universalism. Today, in this house of democracy, we are here to listen and act. It is in this spirit that I invite you to take our rally up. We need to act to make international law evolve, to get the measurement of how military strategies are turning sexual offense, barbaric torture, women's humiliation and mutilation into a central and deliberate weapon of war. We need to act for the universalist dimension to become again the catalyst of the feminist battle. We run the risk of seeing everything collapse if ideology blinds to the point of not showing solidarity to women who experience mass rapes and sexual tortures just because they were Jewish. We have to refuse to countries that contempt human and women's rights to chair committees of international organizations tasked with the protection of these very same rights. As this conference is dedicated to the 1,300 victims of the October 7th massacre, I would like, as a conclusion, to pay tribute to them by quoting a French poet, Paul Éluard, who wrote, and I will say it in English, "If the echo of their voices becomes silent, then we will perish." Thank you.
It's very important to gather here today around this topic. I am consistently shocked when I hear some people who always want to organize a trial of every person who is criticizing what happened to the women in Israel on October 7th, instead of speaking of the perpetrators, instead of trying to understand what actually led to that, what happened, and how can we get justice. So I was in several meetings today where I still had this same feeling of being flabbergasted, because at the end of the day, we are all a bit optimist and you hope that people will just see the light, right? But for certain people, it just never changes. They will speak about everything except what happened to the women. And as a mother and as a woman myself, I cannot understand what the motivation is behind this brutal denial of a reality and the explosion of hatred worldwide against Jewish people because of what happened and this kind of complicit silence. So it is important to meet, to share thoughts, to exchange views. And I was also very inspired and moved to meet you in Antwerp on Sunday night. I met the Jewish community, delegation of the Jewish community in Antwerp on Sunday night, and we had a conversation about what is going on and how the future could look like. I mean, we all want a future without hatred, but to go to that future, we need to recognize hard facts that exist, and the denial on the other side is still persistent. And it's more shocking when it is politicians who carry on with this denial, because as elected members of parliament, our main responsibility is to be intellectually curious and to open our eyes when we see injustice, to tackle it, as you said, to speak about, but also to act and to do something. But when members of parliament refuse to discuss issues because they are not comfortable with it or because they are looking for the votes, then we have a problem, especially when we are in Europe in democracy. Then we have a serious problem, and we have to continue. It's never enough. We have to continue working hard to turn this. We see also the motivation of some members of government from my own country as well, who are not criticizing what is going on with UNRWA, for example, who want to continue giving the money to UNRWA. Why don't they want to ask the real questions? What actually matters is the truth. And there are several entities that can replace UNRWA and remove the hatred that is being given as education to young children in Palestine. Yesterday, there was in the news in Belgium these stairs in Liège, in Wallonia, that were painted in a Palestinian flag by people who call themselves pro-Palestinians. But if you are a true pro-Palestinian, then you should condemn Hamas. You should demonstrate against Hamas. You should want better education for children in Gaza. You should want to remove all the ideology and all the brutal ideology. You should actually defend yourself by saying that you do not stand by what happened to the women. And I cannot unsee the body of Shani Luke on the lorry. You will say that you don't want to see this happening to anyone. If you are really for Palestinians, and if you are European, if you are Belgian, you will also respect Europe. You will also respect Belgium. You will respect your country. You will not want taxpayers' money to go and help funding terrorism. You will want to know, as a politician, what the truth is. You will ask the critical questions and want to see the evidence. But instead, if you put ideology above political action, why are we then in a parliament? Why are we in a government? So this lack of action and taking freedom for granted is what is actually threatening us. It's also a lack of compassion for what is going on in the Jewish community. When I met a lot of so many Jewish children recently, I usually, one big part of what I am committed to doing as a politician is to speak to people, to listen to people. And I listened to so many children. I was in New York and I went to a Jewish school to speak. And after that, children came and spoke with me. I was telling you one of these examples when we met. And one young girl of 9 years old asked me this question: what should I do as I'm Jewish and certain people hate me so much? And I look at that young child, and you can see that she's so young because some of the teeth are still like, you can just, what can you say to this child? What she's saying is true. And children, they say it, but you know that it's not only children who ask themselves this question: what should I do? So what I see is that people ask for justice, ask for respect, ask for the removal of the hatred. And then I hear in every debate that these are the bad people. But why are these people, why do they need to be protected against those who are saying that they're bad? And before I entered this Jewish school in New York, I had to show an ID card. I was a guest. I had to go through, I saw security guards. But when we go and pick our kids here, and in other schools, we don't see any security guards. It is in front of the Jewish school. Do we want a community where synagogues and schools need to be protected? Or do we want a community where it's not necessary and everyone can be everyone else's guest? Our contribution is to help make this kind of protection unnecessary, but for the time being, it is necessary. So our responsibility is to say the truth about what is going on. We have an issue of political silence about key issues like the violation of women's rights, anti-Semitism, and we have political silence about radical Islam. And this political silence is something that we need to continue breaking. It's not enough. We cannot just speak 5 times, 10 times, and then stop. We need to continue until we don't need to protect any single school anymore. We need to continue until people who were born as Muslims like myself and who have a free voice are not threatened. I receive all kinds of threats. Some people explain to me how they're going to cut my head off. All kinds of threats. And they write it publicly because they know that you can say that. They know that you can say that. And if you target them with your ideas, not with anything, with your ideas, they call you an Islamophobic and they call you someone who is spreading hatred. But this is not okay. We need to continue fighting for that. We need to continue making sure that this conversation is not necessary anymore because justice is there. How can we be in a world where we need to convince people that what we saw on October 7th is a threat not only to the Jewish community, not only to Israel, but to the West and to the world. So it is for the sake of global peace that we must stop UNRWA and everything that is fueling Hamas and continue speaking about this issue. I will always be an ally for freedom and against the bad, aggressive vision of those who don't want us to speak, against radical Islam. I wrote in my book that I published recently that we need to accept that what happened and what is happening in Europe, the teachers were killed, in France as well. You cannot, it has something to do with Islam. This sentence has nothing to do with Islam. No, I know the Quran, I know that. It has something to do with Islam that is not adapted to 2024. That is to the period of Muhammad. You need to remove that aspect of things and reform this religion. Everyone needs to put constitution and our laws above religious values. Even something that is not religious, if you read what our grandparents were doing at the time of Muhammad, even if it's not religious, I don't think you can do such things today. No? We just do normal things today. We are in 2024. We have to respect each other and human rights. And everyone who says anything against the idea of justice should have the decency to start saying, bring the hostages home. We saw that the women were brutally treated and raped, and we saw everything. There was spat on, and there was shouts of Allah Akbar. We need justice for this. Reform the UN and all its bodies. It's our money. And the voter needs to tell politicians we need also to have respect. We don't want to be paying for terrorism. So all this we need to continue saying, and I will continue saying it regardless of the amount of threats, because to be honest with you, I am much more scared to live in a world where these people who are behind this kind of violence have more power than we do to change things. That's what I want to contribute.
So thank you very much. I welcome you again, and normally I would say that I'm happy to see you here, but today I'm happy to see you, but not because for the reasons why we are here. The 7th of October, I think, has changed really a lot. Where we all hoped always that there would be a kind of process that could lead to a peaceful living together, was broken in the most brutal way possible by Hamas terrorists. And when I saw the pictures, I think everybody who saw these pictures and has a kind of human feeling inside, these pictures never will go again. If you have spoken, because I've spoken with some of these women, then you really see what has happened to these families and how the families are suffering, and how they were dreaming every night of this nightmare that happened to their families. Because if you have ever experienced this kind of violence, the pictures never will leave your brain again. And this is something that I think that a lot of people don't know or try to ignore. Secondly, I never thought that when I was entering here in the European Parliament, I was a former education minister, And I thought that everybody must agree in the European Union that pupils should be treated in a way that they learn to be peaceful, to be tolerant, to accept other religions, to learn how to behave into a peaceful, democratic society of freedom, and with a justice system that is for everybody equal and for every person equal. And then I experienced that there are books existing, IT programs existing, digital systems existing, where pupils are taught totally different things. I saw it in my in the committee against in the fight against terrorism, where I saw for the first time this kind of Islamistic books for children, how to teach a 4-year-old children to be violent against a person that is not in line with your ideological, religious, extremist thinking. So Jewish people, Jewish women have no rights. So they are not normal human beings. And if you see these kind of books illustrated with images, then you learn that there are these kind of films existing, and then you're asking where to receive these kind of films, and then a specialist told me, come with me, let's go to the bibliothèque. You will find it. This is not possible. This cannot be allowed into our states. This kind of teaching, of books, of films, of videos is disseminated all over Europe in the different member states. Everybody knows it, but nobody does anything against it. So for me, this is one of the first steps that has to be taken. We have to teach the children. And to be quite frankly, we discussed it with UNRWA, and UNRWA was saying, yes, we're totally against this kind of books. And I said, why are they then used in the schools? How to try to help children to accept that there is an Israel state, that there are Jewish, that there are other religions, that there are Christians, Buddhists, whatever, Hindus, that there are different beliefs. UNRWA said yes, they would have now a digitalized program, and the books were not as ugly as I would see it. Then I took one of these books, and the first thing that I found in was that the terrorists that were killing brutally the Jewish athletes in 1972 were heroes for the fight for free Palestine. And I thought, listen, can this be true? That we are terrorizing terrorists, having killed people? And if I take it in the line to the 7th of October, I got a very bad impression about the treatment of the case that the UN did, I have to say. Yes, we are in favor of having an organization like UN, but it was a painfully long silence of the UN feminist organizations, and even of the UN itself. Yes. And now there is this report after a very painful long silence. I would expect of the High Representative of the European Union to express very clearly that there was sexual, brutal violence against Israeli women. This should be dealt by the High Representative of the European Union, to be clear and to be frank. And what I had the feeling, normally, if there is any kind of violence or harassment against women, there are so many feminist organizations normally, that they are very outspoken, producing headlines and whatever, and about sometimes minor things, sometimes bigger things, sometimes important things. But I didn't hear anything about Israeli women. I didn't hear anything about the dead women, about the kind of torture about the kind of how the Hamas terrorists and Islamistic terrorists believe that they can use women's body for their kind of their brutal thinking and extremist and radical thinking, where Israeli women are not normal human beings. They are just instruments for their kind of extremism and for their kind of goals. They don't see the women's crying, they don't see the suffer of the women. What I would really expect of this European Parliament either, and you, dear Tona, you know what I'm talking about, I'm quite outspoken about this. I have a family member that lived for a long time in Israel, and I cannot imagine if, for example, my niece would have gone to this music festival, running away from these brutal terrorists. So if you haven't felt this personally in your family, you cannot imagine what this means to the families. Or, for example, to know what has happened to them, because they cannot speak anymore when they were brought then to those who were taking care of the parts of their body. They have no voices anymore. We have to be their voices. And I'm frustrated that there are sometimes some women here in this parliament, because they believe that they are fight for Palestinians. Okay, you can fight for Palestine. Okay, you can have the opinion that you have to have a wish for Palestine. But this should not include that you are not outspoken if there is brutal violence against Israeli women. Every woman should fight together with us. Whatever political opinion we have, whatever criticism we have to Israel or whatever, but this is not acceptable. This kind of how this is dealt is not acceptable. And I would expect from all women organizations that they are clearly and outspoken saying that this kind of Islamistic mistreatment of women, and if you see in other wars, you see very often that women are victims of brutal sexual violence. Not only in this case, this is a method of terrorists and of certain war strategies. So this is why I explicitly asked UN, I explicitly asked the High Representative to be outspoken together with us in this area, and together with you all, the first step must be to release all the women, all the hostages. This is the first step of the procedure, not the second, the third, or whenever step. This is the first step. And secondly, second step for me is for a peaceful cooperation. I'm not against UNRWA itself. I'm against this kind of UNRWA, to be frank. We need an international organization. But the UN should not be one-sided, but should be the EU is the biggest donor of the UN. Then UN should respect our rules either. And we should have the possibility really to have the control over it. So thank you very much for this conference that we have together. And as I'm really very aligned, I have a lot of Israeli women that are friends. And may I say, they are tough women. I really love them. One of them has contributed to the goal explicitly that, for example, in Munich, and we had a huge debate in Munich, because there were one part of the Jewish community said, to create a synagogue in the middle of the city, this could be very dangerous, because we are always in danger. We should go more into the background because we fear for our life. And Mrs. Knobloch's opinion was, no, we have to go into the middle. Our synagogue was in the middle, absolutely in the center of Munich. And if it's necessary to have protection, we will do that. But Jewish community, since a long, long, long time, was part of the Bavarian community, of the Munich community. And we want to see Jewish life in the middle of our city. As we see churches, as we see other religions, as we see other beliefs, they have the right to do so, and I hope one day that no protection will be needed anymore. Let's work for this.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hohlmeier, for your very personal also words and testimony, and for reminding us how education is central in this issue, and we definitely agree with you on all the aspects that you have raised. Yes, of course. Chaim, please, Ambassador, wants to say a few words.
Thank you, Ariella. Thank you, MEPs. I don't want to take much of your time. I have only one comment on that issue. I'm for 30 years diplomat, and through all my career, we try to mediate, to find a common ground between things, and to make things happen. And what struck me in the last few weeks is, even when we have a clear report that pointing to an evil thing that happened, still there are some factors, institutions here that try to look into it in a balanced way of vision. We thought in the last 2-3 weeks that something will be published out about this specific report that was published by the UN. And for the last, I'm here for 2.5 years, and all the time, they use the UN as the base, a body that they can look into it when they publish some reports about things that relate to Israel. So for the first time, we saw a report that point about something very, very specific thing that happened. And still, we didn't see any statement by, you mentioned the High Representative, Commission, except I think Commissioner Vahel is DG. And we approached them. We told them, it's black and white. There are no nuances on that. So my only ask here is, please, following this forum, following this meeting, press the European Union, the Commission, the Parliament to say something about it. It's extremely, extremely important. Without any nuance, without any vague, gray. It's not gray. It's black and white, pure and simple. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Because we are running out of time, I suggest we reshuffle a little bit the agenda. I would like to give the floor to Orit and Yifat while we are all in this room. And if we have time, we will screen the testimonies that we were supposed to screen. So I apologize for that. But I would like immediately to give the floor to Orit Sulitzeanu, who is the CEO of the Association of Rape Crisis Centers in Israel. So, Orit, you will address the sexual and gender-based violence in the aftermath of the October 7th attacks. Please, Orit.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much, both of you, for your amazing words. Assita and Monika, you were really very amazing. And Ilana, of course. And this is why we need women in power. They will change the world. Well, I will first of all tell you who I am. I'm already over a decade the CEO of the Association of Rape Crisis Centers in Israel, and I'm 30 years activist on the feminist issues in Israel. Who are we, the Association of Rape Crisis Centers? We're an NGO, we're not the government, we're not the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we're a private organization who exists over 30 years, and what we do every day in normal life is fight for rights of victims, survivors of sexual violence, women and men. And we're the umbrella organization of the 9 rape crisis centers in Israel, and we work in the parliament, and we initiate over 50 laws during our existence. From the 7th of October, our life changed. But I also want to tell you something about myself, because I feel very sadly how the history repeats itself, and it's important to say that because I'm also a daughter of my parents. My father, who immigrated from Romania, and left it in 1939, 1 minute before World War II, and he left the country because of anti-Semitism, and he was a professor and he built Israel and so forth. And my mother, who came from Poland and left Poland in 1954, and she was in the World War II, and she was in Auschwitz, and I know what it is to live with a mother who was traumatized. And in that time in Israel, nobody treated the victims of the Holocaust, but I know what it is. And now in Israel, we will have a lot of mothers and fathers who are traumatized, and all the country will be traumatized. And I feel that our history repeats itself, and it's very hard because many people deny the Holocaust. And I lived with a mother who suffered from the Holocaust, and people say Holocaust did not happen. And now again, we're hearing the same things. So what I want to share with you and to explain to you, we published a report, and afterwards you can get it. I didn't bring it in my suitcase because it was very small, but it's all online. And we decided as an NGO to publish a report only because already from the 8th of October, 9th, 10th of October, we started to get trickles of information about sexual violence. And everybody who knows Israel a little bit knows Israel is very small. Everybody knows everybody. My friend, for example, has a soldier which is in Yahalom, which they go under the tunnel, and this guy gave me information really from now what's going on there, what they found there. I don't want to share it with you right now, but this is the way we get information. And already from the beginning, because we're in the focal point in Israel of combating sexual violence, we're in a community. You're a community of diplomats, and we're a community of activists, therapists, doctors, all who care to fight sexual violence. We started to get this information. Nobody in the government said it happened. Nobody knew the extent it happened. And I'm telling you this why? Because I was asked by one journalist if we did our report, and if you didn't read it, I will give you the summary. If we wrote the report because of anti-Semitism. So I told him, no. We started to get information, and I told, we have a researcher in the organization, I told her, we should start to write down who told us the information, what is the information, where did it happen, and what happened. And just very simply, we did a big Excel with the information. And as the days went by, more and more information came. So we decided to do this, to collect the information and analyze it. And we as an organization, we're very professional in analyzing sexual violence. We did all kinds of reports, especially what are the practices, how does it happen. It interested us in other issues, not at all that have to do with the Hamas. But as information kept on coming, and we got a lot of telephone calls, I don't know if at also we're both of us together, dozens and dozens and dozens of telephone calls from media all over the world. And afterwards, I also saw what this media published. So we started to collect all the information, the public information, the result of very thorough investigations done by worldwide media that Israel media did not do. And that's the question I'm asking myself, why they did not do it. I thought maybe it's too close, they couldn't dare to do it, but this is another question for communication theorists. And then we also got information and saw information from many first responders that gave testimonies, talked, even all kind of talking on open sessions, closed sessions, and told what they saw. And the third source of information, we ourselves did interviews with people, but ethically we decided we're not going to interview no survivor, because what happened in Israel was like everybody was running after these survivors. Everybody, it was like really too much, and it's not ethical. The people, the women who survived, and there are women who survived, that's all what I can say. I know. I don't know how much, but I know about a few, and I don't know everything. There is such a trauma, and I don't have to explain to you. And I think a witness that hid and heard the voices of rape is a survivor himself, even to hear that. So we decided we're not going to interview survivors. It's not yet the time, but we know and we have information about survivors. All of these dozen pieces of information were analyzed for two questions. Where did the things happen, and what exactly were the practice of Hamas? What did they do? And what we found out, and I was told by a colleague that maybe people in the world don't know exactly, so I usually try not to talk too graphically, but I will at least give the headlines. What we found are systematic, sadistic patterns of sexual violence, brutal also, systematic, sadistic, brutal practices of sexual violence. And in all of the 4 scenes that we discovered, which were the Nova party, the big party, the kibbutzim and the moshevim, the small places, villages, or that these things happen, beside the army bases or in the army bases, and also in captivity, the same things took place again and again. And when you see all this big piece of information, you understand something that in the beginning nobody knew in Israel. It was not sporadic. It was not some soldier, some terrorist who entered the kibbutz and said, I can do here something. No, it's not an idea of one person. When you see it happen again and again, you can understand. And I'm not an expert of Hamas. I'm an expert of victim of sexual violence. You think to yourself, how come it happens so many times? How come genital mutilation? Shooting the genitals. You know, in Israel we suffer so much of terror attacks, but nobody shoots the genitals. Shooting the faces so you cannot know if it's a man or a woman. Putting in the genitals grenades, knives, and nails. I mean, this is an idea. Who gave them this idea? Gang raping, cutting limbs off, all kinds of limbs, and you know that. Tying the woman, burning the woman, again and again and again. This is very sadistic. I mean, I heard people talking about, and they found these drugs that they took with them. I'm thinking to myself, if I will ever take, I don't, but if I will ever take these kind of drugs, I will never be able to do to a human being these kind of horrific things. So there's no excuse for that drugs. And I also want to say something, as I told you, I'm an NGO, and I think, first of all, what happened in Israel happened before Gaza. And today, many pictures come out of Gaza, and it's very hard, being a human being, being a feminist, it's hard for me very much to see the suffering of citizens who are not involved, because suffering is very hard, and I want peace, and I want this thing to finish. But there's no excuse to what happened to Israel to say what's happening in Gaza. The sexual violence and the using of women as a weapon of war doesn't have any excuse, and I can't understand the blindness of these kind of things. So we published our report, and we were very surprised. I must say, we did not think that it will have such a big interest all around the world. But then the second question started to arise, because I talked with so many journalists, and just last week there was a journalist from the UK, very intelligent journalist, and he's asking me, he's telling me, and I'm sharing with you, because this is a big question for me as an activist and as a feminist. And as you said, I don't think everything is like anti-Semitism. I don't think, it's something bigger than that. He's asking me, he's saying, my friend who is an expert in the darknet, he searched the darknet. In the darknet, he could not find any videos, reels about rape. So please explain that to me. So I told him, you go ask Hamas, what do you want from me? I don't know if it existed or not existed, but all this thing of wanting to prove. And then another journalist is asking me, the world, I'm a journalist, I'm a professional, we want evidence. So maybe you read, but you have to understand what was on that day in Israel and the following days. When the 7th of October happened, we were we were shocked. And the next days, all what was going on in Israel is taking these bodies from the places, putting them in the sacks, and as the Jewish religion commands, as quickly as possible, put them to burial. And all of the parents were calling, is that child, it's like a total chaos, and as you say in Hebrew, balagan, if some of you know this word, which is a great word to portray chaos and disorder. It was like missiles in the sky, terrorists in our southern body, southern borders, and there's kind of an expectancy, like I always say, it's not law and order. It's not like the program from the United States, Law and Order, CSI, when there's a rape scene, the policemen come, they put a red band, they started to photograph. Not at all. No And the specific, like, for rape kits, no rape kits. The main mission was take the people, identify them, and put them into burial. So now Israel has to pay a price of sadism, brutal sadism, so efficient sadism that most of the women and men are not alive anymore. The ones who suffered from the sexual violence are not alive anymore. The women that returned from captivity told stories. Also to the report of Pamela Patton. There are still women in captivity that we know that they're suffering right now from sexual violence. And just now, while I'm waiting to my turn, I was looking again at the UN Women, their social media. Every day or 2 days, they're talking about women in Gaza. And I think it's okay. They could talk about women in Gaza. Always women suffer more, and kids. But not once, what about the women in captivity that are raped every day? Not one. How come? This is not fair. This is not human. This is not the way to do these things. So, so to deal now with this kind of denial, asking us to prove, again, I told these people, the journalists, I'm an NGO, I fight for victims. You can, if you don't want to believe me, don't believe me, But I'm thinking about other countries in the world that suffer from sexual violence: Ukraine, former Yugoslavia, Congo, and Rwanda. Do they have to prove? Now, I know that in Bosnia, like 60,000 or 60,000 women were raped. The numbers were a lot more. Here it is only in enough one day, and I call it a Holocaust, and it's a small scale, but Holocaust. It's not 60,000, it's a few dozens. Most of them are dead. Some are alive, some are in captivity. The witnesses, the families, the first responders, all of these people all together, that witnessed the horrible thing, they are all victims of sexual violence. And now it not only happened, we have to prove, and even if we try to prove, it's denied. Many people are afraid to talk about it because they will be condemned, because there will be, and I think this is in Hebrew there's a way to say, like, gol atzmi, I don't know how to say. This is like a rebound to being a human being. It's something that cannot exist. And I want to end and to share with you, it's like my private history and the Jewish people's private history and the suffering we suffered is now repeating itself, and the world has to learn lessons from the history, because otherwise we're not human beings, and some people don't learn the lessons, and it's very sad. And victims of sexual violence, one of the things they really, really want is acknowledgement. Many times they go to court, they can't succeed because it's too complicated, and the threshold for evidence is very high. But if they get acknowledgement from society, it's some kind of repair. But to live in a world that there's a victim in Israel right now in her bed, taking medications, hardly surviving, and she reads newspapers, and she reads, don't believe, it did not happen, it's only Israel, because she wants to it's like an excuse for what's going on in Gaza. But I was right before. So I'm really calling you, first of all, thank you that you're here. And it cannot happen, and we cannot be quiet, because what happens in Israel can happen in other places in the world. And if we're quiet here about what's happening in our country, it could happen in other countries. And we have to fight this quietness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Orit. We feel your passion, we feel your anger, we all share it. Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor to Professor Yivat, Israeli law professor, co-founder and chair of the Israeli Center for Equality, and president of the Ahva Academic College of Science and Education in Israel. Please, Yivat.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for taking the time and the heart that have somehow become rare and used to be very occasional, to listen to our voices, to listen to the voices of those who were silenced by Hamas and then by the world. So I came here today as an Israeli, but also as a universal feminist, deeply disturbed by the way in which women, victims of sexual violence linked to terror, are required to prove it under unbearable conditions and unfair threshold. I'm troubled not only by the price paid by my Israeli sisters who were raped and murdered, the few who survived, and the hostages who are still in hell on earth, or better said, under earth. It deeply worries me that this demand for unattainable proof of sex war crimes has taken us back decades in the feminist struggle to recognize sexual crimes, their particular severe injurious nature, and the special status required for proving them, which we have worked so hard to alter for the betterment of women. All of these achievements have almost been erased regarding Hamas's terrorist attack, and women around the world, not just Israeli women, will be the last to benefit from it. Even today, after the unequivocal report written by Ms. Pramila Patten, a representative on sexual violence in conflicts on the UN, it turns out that this is not enough for too many. Listen to these quotes from her report. Based on the information gathered by the mission team, there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence occurred during the 7th of October attacks in multiple locations, including rape and gang rape in at least 3 locations. With respect to hostages, the mission team found clear and convincing information that some have been subjected to various forms of conflict-related sexual violence, including rape and sexualized torture and sexualized cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment, and it also has reasonable ground to believe that such violence may be ongoing. Your Excellencies, on this important day in International Women's Month, you, in this esteemed House, have a crucial role to play. It's a multifaceted role. First, you must amplify the recent UN findings. A highly respected expert from across the ocean conducted a thorough exploration and exposed Hamas's horrific sexual atrocities. You must not stay silent or indifferent on this. Second, we must unequivocally condemn the use of women's bodies, all women, as weapons of war. This is an abhorrent practice recently applied on us, and we must denounce it together in the strongest possible manner. Third, it is your humanistic imperative to demand the immediate release of the abducted Israeli women and use every tool at your parliamentary power to pressure Hamas to set them free. Let's face it, this isn't just about them. It's about all of us. We have a global responsibility to each other. Forgive me for being a bit rough, but if this happened to us, as Orit said, it can happen anywhere. We must stand together and prevent such atrocities from happening ever again. This House, with its united voice, can make a difference. Only this way you can ensure that your communities stay safe too. We all know war takes a terrible toll, but the reality is that women bear the brunt of the suffering. Their safety, their lives, their very bodies are under attack, and the pain goes beyond the physical. The denial of justice for sexual crimes adds another layer of trauma, a wound that grows when it's not acknowledged. And this is why recognition of sexual crimes is so important. It's important for the healing. It's the first step on the road to recovery. Without acknowledging their pain, how can these brave women truly begin to heal? It relates to justice. Recognition paves the way for holding perpetrators accountable. It's a crucial piece in the puzzle in seeking justice for these crimes. It has a lot of bearing for mental health. Denial can exacerbate the trauma. Recognizing the truth helps prevent further mental anguish for these survivors. It relates to the truth. Ignoring the truth creates fertile ground for misinformation. We must combat these lies by shining a light on the truth. it shifts the blame. The shame belongs to the perpetrators, not the victims. Recognition helps shifting the burden where it belongs. It comes as no surprise that Hamas now puts enormous efforts in distancing itself from its sexual war crimes. We need to support the victims, and we need to prevent ripple effects of the trauma by recognizing it and not by being silent in the face of the denial that is spreading all over. Recognition is more than just a word, it's a lifeline. Let's speak the truth so healing can begin. Realizing the importance of recognition was what led us to criticize the legal system's oblivious attitude toward an array of evidentiary challenges in proving sex crimes in regular days. These challenges intensify in sex crimes committed as part of a terror attack. We all know terrorist attacks are inherently brutal and inhumane. The crimes committed by Hamas were especially so, pure evil fueled by sadism. But within this horrific act, recognizing the sex crimes, which are always more prone to concealment, render crucial their immediate and peculiar recognition. The uniqueness of the Israeli case places it in a different category and in a different experience that is known to us in cases of sexual-based violence that is linked to terror. Israel is a strong Western country with a rapid and organized military response capability, which motivates the militants to cause as many severe and humiliating casualties as they fear the limited time to carry out their plans, which causes them to try and cause massive chaos. This chaos causes increased paralysis of the forensic mechanisms. From this insight of reality, recognition of sex war crimes must be made. This reality also has a moral relevance to the recognition of sex crimes. The legal and social principle according to which no guilty party should benefit must apply to these cases. The legal idea that implies that inflicting damage does not allow the removal of responsibility from those who caused damage and in the process also impaired the victim's ability to prove the damage caused to her. In this case, too, a terrorist organization that sabotages by imposing chaos in the ability of the attacked state to use its routine mechanisms to prove sexual war crimes must be held accountable. Terrorists exploit the chaos that they themselves have created to sexually harm victims, and then the victims themselves need to fight for the recognition that they need against both the sexual terror attack and the country's struggle to prove that what happened to them was the reality. The Hamas terror attack is now a test case for understanding states' ability and inability to meet the chaos challenges that they faced. The same systems are composed mainly of those considered first responders, as Orit described them, who came into the field and faced the barbaric terrorist chaos with their hands tied behind the back of these liberal and reformed goddesses of the goddess of justice. It is important to understand that the first responders actually became witnesses in an attack of terror and chaos. And due to the severity of the atrocities committed by Hamas, some of them themselves have become secondary victims. Many of them did not return to full function. Some suffered from PTSD, some of them suffered from stroke, from heart attacks, and some of them, not a few, committed suicide due to not being able to bear the pain of what they've seen. So the challenges of proving sexual-based violence in Israel were enormous. The areas where the sexual assaults took place were actually the crushing aftermath of a terror attack. The very idea of a sterile crime scene becomes a distant thought, and places consumed by violence are the harsh reality. There's also the fact that it was a one-day event. In such a reality, silence tells us the story. The victims were silenced, murdered, And indeed, some bodies were found telling the horrors, as noted by the UN report and by the report of the Israeli crisis center organizations. The results of the injuries are also hard to see, as opposed to cases of continued terror, where sexual abuse is continuously used. Testimonies are constantly surfacing, and the results of gender-based violence can be detected. Prominent examples are forced pregnancies in Bosnia and Rwanda, continual holding in captivity by the Yazidi women, of the Yazidi women by ISIS, or Nigerian girls by Boko Haram. However, it is important to remember that even in these cases, almost no cases were taken to court. Almost no accountability, legal accountability, was practiced on these on the perpetrators. So imagine how hard it is in our case. Even when it comes to forensic evidence, I recently spoke to a senior official from the Israeli Forensic Lab and the country's chief pathologist. They explained to me that typically a team of 3 people should be spending several hours for examining a single body without even taking a look at the scene itself. So imagine how burdening it is to have it for hundreds and hundreds of dead bodies. It was simply impossible because of the nature of this terrorist attack in that respect. But still, we have these reports stating that these atrocities happened, and the international silence should not be tolerated due to that. So Israelis perceive Hamas as a terrorist organization whose tactics, however vicious, do not include systematic use of sexual violence. Therefore, even the systems in Israel, it took time for them to organize and respond to what was happening. So in this respect, it is unfair to look at what Israel was doing, but rather to objectively and independently provide the condemnation that is required. And I know that this House is able of doing so, of providing resolutions regarding gender-based violence on a universal in a universal manner, but definitely also on what has happened here, because if this has happened to the almighty Israel, it might happen to you too. And it is exactly the place where the responsibility and the power is in the international body's hands to make sure that no other country will have to endure if not the attacks, definitely not the aftermath, and not the blame it on the victim type of denial that we're facing right now. Thank you.
So thank you for being here. Thank you for all of you for being here, from your involvement, both of you. It's very important. You can count on our full support, of course. Thank you, Elnet, and all the organizations, because we have to continue. I just want to say that, of course, as you know, one of the survivors said. She said words are lacking, to describe the reality, but we are also going through a situation in which we can understand that for the security of the hostages, they cannot testify. They are asked not to testify, because if they testify too publicly, so maybe the others who are still hostages will be killed, not to be able to testify in the future. So, of course, we all understand that what we know is 100% of what we will discover. So this is terrible, first of all. Then I think that, of course, all our focus should be on, of course, to ask for the release of the hostages, of course, but also we want to know everything. Afterwards we will have to insist and to get involved, so that to understand. Even when the medicines didn't reach the people that were in bad situation, maybe the Red Cross couldn't. But we will have to know exactly what did what, and did they do their maximum, etc. Because we want to understand. But we will also act for the recognition of what happened, because as you said, it's part of the recovery as human beings. But it's also, as you both of you said, that it's a question of our future, because what is going on concerns everyone, because we cannot accept that, and this is and so we really have to fight against the denial, against this. We are feeling it, but it will probably be worse and worse. So we have to stay mobilized, and we are not acting only for the person concerned, only for Israel, only for the Jewish people, but for our all humanity. So this is absolutely essential. So I want to tell in the name of all my colleagues that we will stay totally mobilized. You can count on us. Each of you, that you can count on us. You know how to reach us, and we have to go on, because there was this beautiful sentence of the founder of the CRIF, who was this umbrella of the French Jewish organization, who said, Adam Reisky, who said, we have to build the future dans l'ombre de la mort. I don't know exactly how to translate it.
In the shadow
In the shadow of death. So this is for our generation. I mean, some of you, most of us, we didn't have this to face. So this is our destiny, but we have to be strong. And again, I mean, don't let melancholy and discouragement overwhelm you. We have to remain, because that's why our enemies are searching. Yeah. So let's be united, mobilized, and we will win, and strong. We will win because we are mobilized for a just cause. And thank you so much for coming. And this is only a beginning.
Thank you.